But then the really big question shows up, which is, how do you measure what you're doing in terms of impact? So sometimes this is called double bottom line or triple bottom line investing, or triple bottom line finance. What they mean by triple bottom line is one of those lines is the financial return, one of the lines is the social return, and the third line is the environmental return. And I'll tell you, I haven't heard that framework in a long time, because it's just hard enough to do a double bottom line of what's your finance and what is your impact. So let's just think about that for a moment. We're going to put finance off to the side. We'll talk about that some other week. And we're just going to say, how do you measure what impact you had with that investment or are having with that investment? When you see a company, what is their measure of impact? And if you see 2 companies or 3 companies or 10 companies, how do you compare? Again, if you go back to Rachel's 3 examples, right, in her framework of, do you want a small change for a large number of people or a large change for a small number of people? How do you compare those things? And then the hardest one of all on this list, if you have 2 separate investments, I love to do chickens and solar panels. Right? Chickens solve poverty, solar panels solve environmental issues. If you put them together, you don't get a solar powered chicken. Right? How do you aggregate the impact of solar panels and the impact of chicken farming? And so I'm going to show you some frameworks to do that. So here's before we jump in there, here's the 3 problems. We're going to measure the impact of 8 different issues. So we got deforestation to illiteracy. Those are all problems. They're all solvable, and they're all solvable with for-profits or revenue-generating nonprofits or hybrid companies. So we could measure them with, they each have a separate measure, right? In terms of deforestation, we can measure trees. In terms of illiteracy, we can measure the number of kids in school. But which one of those is biggest? And if we had more time, and if we were doing this in person, I would totally do this and have people vote. But we're going to skip that part and just take a moment here and say, which one of these to you looks like the biggest impact? Right? Is it 50,000 cook stoves because 50,000 is the biggest number? Is it 50 jobs because that lasts longer than cook stoves? Is it 1,000 vaccines because we might have saved some lives? Like, it's arguable. We could sit here and argue for hours on which is the largest. The harder one then is problem 3, right? Aggregating. Okay, so let's just say we just as a group invested in these 8 companies doing these 8 different things. And now we want to know, what's the total impact across our portfolio? Well, it's probably not just adding the numbers together. I'll tell you that's probably not the right answer. So I have this problem in my life. I run an impact fund. It has made 105 investments in companies in over 24 countries. There's 105. We call them fledglings. And here is what they do. They do all sorts of things. I have a company, one that failed, but I have a company that worked on free speech, a for-profit company that was advocating and solving the problem of free speech. And at the same time, we had a company that was working on turning human waste into value, and recycling and medical care and cook stoves. It's just all over the map. And yet I'm asked by my investors, what's the impact of the fund, not the individual companies? So solution number 1, the first one I ever came across from years and years ago, it's called social return on investment. And it sounds really nice. You just take every one of your impacts and you figure out what they're worth in dollars. So if we're saving 300 hectares of trees, well, trees have value. Trees have a market value. So let's just multiply 300 hectares by however many trees are on a hectare. And then let's multiply that by the value of a tree. And we get a number. 100 solar installations. Okay, well, we're offsetting electricity. We know what the electricity costs. We know what the solar installation produces. We can turn that into dollars. Starts to sound okay. Maybe we can do carbon offsets on that solar, right? So maybe if we're offsetting the burning of coal, okay, well, we know we think we know what a ton of CO2 costs, right? There's a market for that. Problem is that none of the markets agree that the price of CO2 in the Quebec market is different than the price of CO2 in the European market, different from the California market, different from the carbon price in British Columbia, Canada. it gets really hard. And then we get to the just impossible ones. What's 1,000 vaccines worth? So what's a life worth? That's a question that the insurance companies ask. They have an answer in any given place, but the answer is different in every place. Vaccines aren't saving every life of everyone who gets a vaccine. They're saving a percentage of that. We don't know how many people would have gotten sick without the vaccine. These things start to get hard, and then we get to 500 hospital beds, and it gets even harder. And as we go through here, we'll just see this is really, really hard. It's possible you can come up with a swag, you can come up with a guess, but your guess is going to be different than my guess, different from Rachel's guess, and the numbers are just not doable, which is why we don't see this too often. But it is the simplest one to think about.